Raj, it's great to see you again. I hope you've been well. I think the first time we connected was when you were speaking at my ad tech conferences in around 2007 or 8. So amazing how a decade plus just zips by. But it's great to have you here. And as we let this poll sort of finish up, everyone can take a look at that, and we'll incorporate that into our discussion. But first, Raj, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? I know you had some COVID experiences yourself, but talk a little bit about how you're feeling today and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, sure. Nice to be here, and good to see everyone virtually. Yeah, I had gone away for the weekend, March 12th, and I noticed that I was around people from all over the place. It was in Colorado. When I came back, I started feeling sick on Sunday, got worse on that Monday. And and then I found that some of the people I was with from New York texted positive. So I was able to get an appointment, luckily, because it was difficult at the time, got a test at a drive-through and found that it took 9 days to get the results back. So It was a very anxiety-filled 9 days. And of course, even now, but more so even at that time, we don't really know how this impacts every individual.
Right.
We hear about all sorts of different symptoms that you have. So luckily, over that period, it did not impact my lungs, but I did have pretty much every other symptom that's there: fever, aches, sore throat, loss of taste and smell.
Yep.
And it really was interesting because it came in waves. A few days after my symptoms, I began to feel better, and I thought I was okay. And then a second wave hit, and it hit just as hard. Given the lack of information and the lack of things around that, it was certainly difficult, but I'm really happy to say that I'm recovered now. I was, and I can get into kind of what that caused me to do in terms of a public health initiative. But before I do that, from a personal perspective, I wanted to see if I could donate plasma. And I went a week before Saturday for testing at Stanford, because at that point, it's been 30 days since I had the symptoms, and I thought everything's clear. And I was surprised to hear back that I was still positive after 30 days. And what was worrisome to me was the fact that the CDC was giving guidelines that after 14 days, you can, your symptom, when you're symptoms free, you can go about your business. And clearly, for a portion of the population, that's not the case.
Right.
Stanford told me, actually, amongst the other people that were there, COVID positive, donating plasma between 14 to 28 days out from their test, they said that 50% of them were now coming back positive. So we were learning something new pretty much in real time. I just got another test this week, and luckily it came out negative. So finally, I think that the virus has cleared my system.
Well, that's congratulations on being able to get tests as well. I've been here in New York, and I still can't get a test, even though I had some. But it's been crazy. And I do want to talk about the initiative a bit, and we'll dive into that in a few minutes. And why don't you just set us up with a bit of your remit there at Lyft and what you're focusing on? And I know you were one of the original investors in Lyft when it was called Zimride, I believe. So it's kind of full circle for you.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about the COVID initiative, but before going there, so for Lyft, I've just a quick background. I started as an entrepreneur, in tech, came out in 1996 when things were just starting up. That's why I think Drew and I go way back.
Yep.
And worked it at home, and then started a company called Snapfish, an online photo service, and that was another downturn, which I had to sell it through, but we ended up selling it twice, also in the upturn. And after that, I joined Mayfield as a VC for 7 years. And I was really fascinated by network effect-driven businesses, where when you add more people to an innovation or technology, the value goes up for every node on the network. And the oldest examples of that are like the telephone, the postal service, the fax machine. And newer examples, of course, the internet itself, but even some of the big companies that we know of, like eBay and YouTube, The Google advertising marketplace is a great example of a network effect. In fact, 70% of value created from technology companies in the public markets are from companies that have a network effect. So I was seeking and hunting other sectors to bring the network effect. And when I looked at transportation, I looked at it through the lens of climate change. In 2006, I was really passionate about making a difference. And I saw that transportation was one of the leading causes. And transportation was one of the leading causes a lot because of inefficiency. There's only one person in a car for 75% of rides, single occupancy. So I thought, isn't there a way that people can share the ride? Network effect. That was it. I didn't have any other ideas beyond that. And someone from my alma mater, Carnegie Mellon, reached out and said, I know these two people, John and Logan.
Yep.
They started a ride board. It was called ZimRide. And they're connecting people, like if you want to go from San Francisco to LA, Boston to New York. And I said, that sounds really interesting. And I met them and I could just see how genuine they were about it.
Yeah.
Logan was working on this since he was in UC Santa Barbara in college. While other people were out partying, he was literally on the board of the Santa Barbara bus transportation system, trying to figure out how to make buses more efficient. And he came up with the idea of a ride board because he was in Zimbabwe and noticed that there were entrepreneurs, rather than waiting on the government for bus lines, they got large vehicles and were transporting groups of people, point A to point B. So ZimRide was born. I led the Series A. And what we found was, interestingly, is that yes, it's interesting, but for it to be a high growth company, you needed more frequency of use. How many times do you really need to go between San Francisco and LA? So it was used as a niche. And the other point is that the business model was challenging because it was consumer to consumer. So maybe you're paying the person for gas, but that's about it. And at that time, mobile payments were not there. Even mobile apps were not there. Right. This was 2007 when they started, and 2010 when I led the investment. At the same time, we saw the need and challenge of day-to-day transportation in a city. And we saw this little company, Uber Technologies, do Uber Black.
Right.
And we thought, why can't we do that peer-to-peer? So in a hackathon, after I invested, the team quickly built a mobile app that allowed a consumer to hail another consumer. So it was like a ride board, but for cities, is the way we thought about it.
Yeah.
And in that first week, the predicted demand that we thought we'd have when we just threw it out to San Francisco with those pink mustaches was probably 10 times higher than we had expected. So we were onto something. And I have to hand it to John and Logan, because at that point we had 25 people, 23 were focused on ZimRide, which was making money actually for institutions, colleges, universities operating a ride board, enterprises, Facebook. But then they pivoted and only put 2 people on it and put everyone else on what at the time was not even a legal business, which was peer-to-peer ride sharing.
Right.
And then the big difference also is that they, from day one, they worked closely with California to define this category called TNCs, and one by one got all 50 states to turn over.
It's amazing. It's such a great story. And you were also really helpful getting John to keynote one of my first App Nation events. I don't know if you remember those as
great.
well. And I look back at the email strings and they were still ZimRide. And then it evolved over to Lyft. Well, I do want to go back to your COVID story and talking about sort of innovation and how your story, do you think can relate to, broader health innovation moving forward as well, and what you've learned and what you think institutions and organizations can learn from your initiative, but share a little bit about your initiative first, and then we'll dive into the broader marketplace in a bit.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I'd suffered from COVID, and there was a lot of anxiety, and I guess my fight or flee mechanism came up, and I couldn't flee, so I fought.
Right.
And what I did is I also found that there was a stigma associated back in mid-March. People were afraid to come out that they had COVID. And so I decided to just put a note out on Facebook, mostly, tech community friends, say, hey, I've got it. I think I'm over it. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that I'm here for emotional support if anyone needs help, because this is tough. And someone immediately, a lot of people wrote back. And then what I got was a couple requests. Actually, interestingly, Bill Gurley from Benchmark, who invested in Uber, is a friend and reached out and said, hey, I've got another friend, David Freiberg, who runs Climate Corp, was sold for like $1 billion. He's devoted his time now to helping California figure out the testing problem. And we think we're going to need antibody tests at some point. So can you test a couple? And I said, sure. And so literally that night, David sent a Lyft, not an Uber. And I got a couple tests that were from China and pricked my finger. And my wife also pricked her finger. And we both realized, and she's a physician, and we both realized, wow, this is really disorganized. And she explained to me clinical trials. And I dug into clinical trials and found that 85% of clinical research trials are delayed due to patient participation, patient recruitment. And that if you're a patient trying to get into a trial, 65% of the time you're going to abandon it because it's just too complicated. And so as my wife and I discussed that further, we said, you know, this could actually be the long pole in the tent on finding a cure, a vaccine, on getting testing ramped up, because we need innovative tests.
Right.
And on treatments, because if you don't have enough patients, and let's say it takes a month longer, you've actually increased the entire pandemic if that treatment or vaccine was going to be the very specific thing that were to solve it. So right away, the fight in me wrote out a message on Facebook and said, hey, I think there's an opportunity for a registry. My wife and I want to create this. Does anyone know of a team that's doing anything close to this? And another VC said, yes, this company called Clara Health. And I saw this company, and they had a platform that they created where they sucked in all the clinical research trials from the web. Yeah. And then on the other side had a really simple consumer interface to screen. And I learned that they were able to match 10,000 patients over the last 3 years into 60,000 different trials.
Wow.
So I went to the CEO and I said, look, we are in a crisis. This is not a time for a for-profit entity. Would you be open to taking what you've created and creating a version of it only for COVID, testing, treatment, vaccine, and also make it free to every institution, for-profit, nonprofit, in addition to patients. And I will help you go out get this out from a consumer perspective, given my experience. And within 24 hours, he agreed. Within 2 weeks, we had the site up. And now we have over 800 research trials. We need 300,000 volunteers. We need 15 million into observational trials globally.
Wow.
And so we just got this thing off the ground. We need a lot more consumers in, and we're working on distribution. We got some media coverage, but we have a lot more to do. And what's exciting is that just, you know, you got to think about which parts of the value chain you could innovate, and can it have impact? Right. And, you know, yes, there's amazing people that are scientists doing work, but each one of us brings a skill or an expertise. In my case, how can I help consumer acquisition be accelerated to potentially accelerate the pandemic? And could we find the company that's doing that? So it's been really awesome to see this outpouring from the innovation community of helping in this pandemic. And I think there'll be some great stories written about it. I hope this little effort amounts to something as well.
No, it will. And I've socialized it a bit, and I'll continue to, and please keep me updated, and we'll put that out to our community.
One more thing just on that, which please. I think is interesting. So my wife also noticed, as she's a medical researcher too, that plasma donations were increasingly becoming needed. It's still not 100% clear that plasma donations with antibodies will help someone that's being treated, but there's enough evidence to make it emergency use, which is what the FDA authorized. We ended up talking to the blood community, and we ended up finding that there was a dire need that was going to be coming like a tsunami. Same way that PPE and ventilators, now we're going to be like, oh my God, where are all the plasma patients? And people have stopped giving blood because they're afraid.
Right.
And blood donation centers don't know how to evaluate someone coming in because of the COVID issue. So we are also directing all of our COVID positive patients that come into this registry and linking them to urgent plasma donation opportunities. And a comment I will make there before I close on that is that we also found that the blood plasma donation, like many industries, is fragmented, and the databases don't talk to each other.
Right.
So if you go into one plasma donation and you're a donor or seeker, another one doesn't know that you have it, and you can transport blood across state. So I see an opportunity for technologists to come in and upgrade the data infrastructure of blood. I never would have thought that that would have been the case, but this pandemic is exposing where innovation is sorely needed.
That's great. And is there a site just generally regarding the registry that people can go just to get more information?
Yeah, worldwithoutcovid.org.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. You know, thinking a little bit about your experience and how has that impacted you in terms of your role at Lyft and you've had a lot of time to reflect, and then also talking about sort of value chain innovation, and how will you see this experience and coming out of this on the other side impacting you and your approach to the business and your responsibilities at Lyft and even the company moving forward?
So I think this entire pandemic has highlighted how important a sense of urgency is, number one. Number two, that if your culture and your DNA is mission driven, it's actually a lot easier to get going. Right. Because a lot of those questions about priorities become very clear in a crisis. And so you could always say, look, I got to look after the company first, et cetera. And look, our business as reported is down just like others. But right away, we set up a task force early to address the impact of COVID on our entire community, which includes passengers and drivers. And literally within days, it was set up a COVID task force, and people that were in policy, communications, operations, product, driver relations. Normally it would be a real mess to get everyone together, but because everyone knew that this was our ethos, the first question was, what do we do? How do we do it quickly? Yep. Like, we're all on board, we're in this. And so we were able to launch out a number of innovations that we've never done before really fast, that we've announced, like whether it's Lyft Up, giving free bike and scooter rides to essential workers, because they find that to be, a safe way to transport in a city, and they need to get there quickly. Giving out tens of thousands of ride credits for people that have essential transportation needs. We work with United Way, the National Council on Aging, making sure that the caregivers could get food and supplies to seniors. And we even, I think one of the hardest things we did is we've always been transporting humans. Very quickly, we converted our business to transport essential items. Yeah. So this is about pharmaceuticals, around groceries, and the agility that we were able to do that with. And one of the things that we did is, look, when we launch one of our products, like a pay product to our drivers, it takes months and months of testing because you don't want to screw it up. Right. We gave ourselves the license to do an MVP, where it is bubblegum and toothpicks, because getting out there was more important than getting it fully right. Yep. And I will say, in terms of getting the medication that for whatever I had, it came delivered, and it came delivered by a Lyft to my home. Oh, great. Yeah. That's good to hear. So a question about that, because we, at CDX, we focus and talk a lot with legacy companies, which would look at Lyft and say, we could only dream of product innovation happening that fast. You move at warp speed compared to even the innovation groups of legacy companies. So how does a company that is already known for being innovative, a Silicon Valley, fail fast, innovative company, accelerate that innovation even faster in terms of how you responded in the last, several weeks to the crisis? Was there anything that you can point to that people could take as a lesson from a company that is already innovations in your DNA, and now you're even doing it faster? How? Yeah. So it's a combination of top down, bottom up. On a top down basis, it was crystal clear from our founders, this is important, drop what you're doing, take care of our community. There was no minced words. So for example, when DACA was threatened and immigration was threatened after our current president, there were lots of debates in technology about the technology world. How should we respond to the immigration crisis? We still want to be friends with the administration, blah, 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 blah. Right. Because of our values and beliefs, and the majority of our drivers being immigrants, within 24 hours, we donated to the ACLU, and we're behind it. We were the first company to do that. And it was because of the top down people. It wasn't a surprise because everyone knows our values, and they made it crystal clear that this was really important. No debates, no word, nothing asked, number one. But that's not enough, because you can have a really ambitious, innovative CEO of a large company that tries that
Right.
and fails. So the second piece is bottoms up. Bottoms up is, okay, I've heard the directive. Now, can I organize myself? Can I be clear very quickly on what resources I'm given, both from a human and a capital perspective? And can you let me come up with, if that was the objective, let me come up with the key results and push it back up fast.
Yep. Yep.
And then there's a sync on, that's a good key result. It's called like OKR management. Okay, it matches the objective, go, check in, that's it. So it is then empowering a team to take the objective and move quickly and get the resources. And because the priority was clear, it happened. The second piece of it, and this is another piece, is that that's great, but that team also has to still deliver because ours is an essential business. We're still operating during the pandemic.
Right.
And so there's a willingness to put in the extra hours, quite honestly, that was already existent there, versus someone saying, yeah, I know you want me to do this new thing, but that means I'm going to really drop the ball here because I've done a time study and it just won't work. The culture is just, we're going to do what it takes.
Right.
It's going to ebb and flow.
And in regards to that, certainly even for large companies, it might be hard to execute even with a ambitious CEO who lays down a mandate going top down. That's one way to do it. But from a bottoms up approach, getting kind of really granular and tactical here, what's your recommendation for facilitating that bottom up, sort of sentiment that's coming up, ideas, innovating to make sure that it gets to senior management? I mean, how does it work there? Does someone send a Slack? Does someone send an email? Like literally, how does that happen from bottom up?
And so much of this, like, you say Slack, and I can't say how important setting up communication infrastructure is that's direct.
Right.
Because where these things get lost is when you have 6 layers of management and you just can't get a voice heard that's on the front line.
All right.
So that delivery team for essential deliveries was set up instantly with direct access to John Zimmer.
Right.
And literally a Slack group was set up directly.
Yeah.
That was there. And so there was no 4 layers, 5 layers. There was no ego of the hierarchy chain that felt like they needed to be involved. If they could help, they could help. Otherwise, get out of the way.
Yeah.
In doing that.
I agree. And I think, this can also happen at a large corporation. I once had a problem as a small business customer of Bank of America, and I was very frustrated with a payment taking a long time to clear that came from overseas. It was like 12 days. And I literally sent a note to Moynihan, and I got a response back within 8 hours. And if you followed the email string, he had like a rapid response team that literally did this. So I think it can even work in the larger organizations. One thing to think about, Raj, and I'd like your thoughts.
And I'm sorry, one other comment I would make is that the other piece is you've got to pick your battles.
Right.
If every possible issue that people cared about was a task force reporting to the founder, it doesn't scale.
Right.
So you can't do this across everything. You really have to pick a few things to do it well.
Absolutely. Pick some small battles, get some wins, right, and go.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And I want to get to some questions out there. So I see a few questions that have been posted. Let's keep those questions coming. Josh, I'll go to you for some questions in a minute. Raj, I just wanted to get your thoughts on, not so much specifically about Lyft in the business, but just broadly about consumers and coming back. And, every company's thinking about it, whether I have a movie theater or I'm a McDonald's, or, when do people come back? Do you have any thoughts about, not the timing necessarily, but in terms how people come back and how you're going to welcome your customers back once we sort of get to the other side, and just what that environment looks like? Does Lyft have to expand or modify in some kind of way its core brand value proposition to people? It used to be convenience and getting from point A to point B. Now it's also safety and security and cleanliness. Like, how are you thinking about the consumer when they're coming back to you?
Yeah, I think, starting at that last point you just made, and then I can go broader. Very specifically, cleanliness of vehicle has always been an attribute.
Right.
That's really important. And, but now it becomes really first and foremost, it takes a different level of importance right now.
Right.
Because cleanliness is tied to safety. Safety, you used to think about drivers. and passenger safety.
Right. Absolutely.
Now you're thinking more about who are the 10 people before me in this vehicle, and how am I going to interact with that driver that potentially could or could not have a health issue
Yep.
that's there. And not just selfishly, but also because you want to protect the driver and you
Right.
care about the driver. And so it is going to be, when we come, and we're already operating, obviously, but when the consumer comes back in droves, we have to change our messaging and also address it in product changes.
Right.
That are there. Different procedures, the basics like having masks, having protective wear, all of that is really important. Now, taking a more broader view on the economy on that's there, I do believe that consumers are going to go through this similar to in a wartime, where there's going to be some PTSD coming out of it. So even so first of all, there's going to be a clear impact until we have a vaccine or some level of immunity, which we still don't understand, or very effective treatments across the board. Any of those three things are still a long way away. So there's a phase one, which is you're coming back when it still exists. And then there's a phase two, is when it's gone, I still think there's going to be some PTSD.
Right.
Because now everyone is aware that this is not going to be the last pandemic. It's the first pandemic.
Right.
And in some cases, like what Bill Gates said, is we're kind of saved by this one. It's extremely viral, but it's not as lethal as it could have been, with other viruses. So I think we are going to see a change in general that's going to last for a very long time. But let's just talk about the next, 12 to 18 months, where we're still going through this, but businesses coming back online. You absolutely have to be thoughtful. There are early indications coming out from consumers that even though a governor says we're going to open up and businesses are putting a shingle up, they're not coming in.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they're coming back.
So trust and confidence that the business owner is taking care of it is super critical, that they're on top of this, that they understand the situation. And I think that it's going to be very gradual.
Right.
It's not going to be this big rush. And for that reason, if I was a business and thinking about innovation as it relates to coming back, I would think almost in a timeline of innovations that you can bring on board, starting with the ones that have the most impact. Don't feel like you have to solve 15 things at once. This is one of the Silicon Valley things, is what's your MVP on coming back?
Right.
And then know that you can iterate it. This is not a static program. Every month you can have a new release of your coming back, and you can update it just like software.
That's great. We're going to go to a question here in 1 second, Josh. Raj triggered something in my head. Just, I'm a Silicon Valley native, San Jose, mom's still there. Give me quickly, because I do want to get to questions, but 30 seconds on the state of the Valley. How's it feel? I mean, people still want to invest. Is it people are leaving? Just give me your 30-second overview on the state of Silicon Valley today.
So there are, from an industry perspective, so from a consumer and human perspective, we have been spared because we did do the shelter in place well before others. Yep. And honestly, also because a lot of our employment can work from home.
Right.
So we were able to do this quickly. People like Slack are saying they're going to keep doing it till September, they've announced. That's one. On the industry, state of the industry, it's really the haves and the have-nots. Because as we see, technology in some applications is coming to save the day.
Right. Whether
it's online commerce, real-time communications, video, etc. On the other hand, things that rely on it, like travel, anything related to discretionary events, they're being impacted dramatically. So it's a very different outlook. Capital is still massive.
Right.
And is flowing no problem into those businesses that are being helped. And the ones that are hurting, everyone knows that it's going to go away at some point, but there's so much uncertainty that there is a pause.
Right. Right.
So it's not coming back in all areas.
Indeed. So Josh, let's get out to some questions here.
Great. Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Raj. First, we're going to go over to Rachel in a second, but any of the questions, if you can, before you ask your question, if you could identify yourself, your name and organization, that'd be great. And let's go over to Rachel. Would you like to ask your question? Do we have Rachel?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
You can.
Okay. So one, thank you both for talking. Thanks, Raj, for sharing your story. I have a question specifically about how can more VCs and investors or just people in like the startup ecosystem connect directly with international entrepreneurs solving problems that are eventually adopted in first world spaces? So when you were talking about Zimride, my family's from the Bahamas and Jamaica, and I just knew, and I'm also from New York, and there's dollar vans. And so when you said that Zimride came from Zimbabwe and how people are like catching rides on streets in Africa, I was just curious, like your thoughts of like how can we look elsewhere for solutions, and how can you specifically tap into those entrepreneurs who are coming up with innovations, quote unquote, that are things that are not necessarily that eventually get adopted here in the US or Europe or elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that innovation has changed dramatically. So when I first came to Silicon Valley, a lot of the great ideas happened in Silicon Valley, were hatched in Silicon Valley, and then were scaled in Silicon Valley. Now, what we're finding is that most of the good ideas are happening outside of Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley still has the ability to what Reid Hoffman calls blitz scale, which is to take a company from early traction and make it into a colossal global corporation faster than anyone because of all the expertise and people that are here. So to your point, I think the majority of ideas are gonna continue to come from outside. And I probably think that there's been a shift in the venture capital community recently where they used to just want to not travel that much to maybe not right now, but eventually picking back up travel and looking outside. And one final thing I will say is that the lines of communication of innovations that are happening, whether it's Africa or Europe or wherever, are better than they've ever been. Doesn't mean it can't be better than that, but I'm really pleased with how quickly we're seeing things on a global basis.
One quick follow-up there, Raj, in terms of, entrepreneurs, and I've thought about this a lot. It is a reset and a new moment in time that's coming. It feels in kind of a way like the app sort of revolution. It was this new environment that was coming. If you were just starting up a company and thinking about the road ahead, what would you invest in, or what company would you start tomorrow for the new normal and the new consumer economy?
Yeah. So from a impact on the world perspective, I think climate change and anything to do with carbon reduction is critical, because I think it's going to be more ignored, unfortunately, over the next few years, given where the world is. Right. But if I want it to be more, let's just say, focused on productivity and not solving world hunger, I think that we are at the Stone Age on real-time collaboration. What I'm doing right now with this Brady Bunch style video sharing is not at all what it could be and should be given the state of our technology today.
Right.
And I just got an Oculus Quest. I don't know if anyone's played with virtual reality. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I could see, now I really understand the power of that virtual reality and being having the space where I can be surrounded by the people on this call and interacting is much more powerful than this video that we're doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, trust me, as someone who's done 100 straight conferences that were physical in-person conferences, and now thinking about, all right, how do we do this better? And the entire conference industry, right? I mean, how do you create great digital experiences beyond hearing people talk, right?
Yeah, Zoom is good, but it's not really made for what you're doing right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Josh, we have another question?
Yeah, we're going to go over to Reza Jafari. Reza, you should be on now.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Raj. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your thoughts with us. And it's interesting and very thought-provoking. As we all know, the intersection of customer expectation and the company capacity and capability is what we wanted to do, always maximize it and to see again where we are in terms of the customer experience. Now that the world has changed, how do you define or redefine a new customer expectation in terms of what the capacities that we need to create to be able to maximize that experience?
Yeah, I think that the underpinnings of what innovation is about, which is the ability to move quickly, rapidly sense what your customers want, what's not working, and iterate on the product, which now goes beyond software. People are iterating faster on hardware. People are iterating faster on services that involve humans. All of that still remains as important as ever that's there. I think there is now an added layer that we were discussing earlier, which is to recognize the mental state of your customer and how safety and, frankly, security at its most basic level, security of me as a human being, plays into whatever you're doing. And so it will impact almost everyone, because it's not just, even if you are a fully virtual company, you're still dealing with a customer that has changed their psyche. So it's less about, I would say, capabilities and more about, probably if you're going to invest, it's more in customer listening. But from, there's a lot of buzzwords around empathetic listening. I think we probably have to go look at those books again.
Good question and good answer. Thank you. Josh?
Yep, we're going to go over it's kind of a follow-on question to that to Jack about sort of incentives moving forward. Jack?
Hey, Raj, thanks. And Drew, good to see you.
Likewise, Jack, thanks.
Yeah, of course. The question I have, Raj, is thinking about the wary, rider who is trying to figure out how, when we get back to the new normal, whether I'm going to give anyone a handshake or a hug, much less get into a stranger's car. So knowing that that's going to require some effort, and I know that there's plans around that because I've seen what the travel industry, hotel industry, and I know that the rideshare industry is going to do the same thing to ensure that we all feel safe. So that I think is a given. Having said that, in order for people to move back into the back seat, have you considered incentives, potentially like an e-coupon type of incentive that could potentially dovetail over and help the small businesses that desperately need our revenue right now? I should say revenue right now. And so essentially some type of a program that allows, riders to consider, hey, I'm going to take Lyft because I'm going to get a buy one, get one free pizza at the end of this, or whatever that thing is. I'll leave it at that.
Sure. So we have had incentives like that, programs that we did. We have the Chase Sapphire card. I think the interesting opportunity that we have done on a small scale, but we're looking to see scaling, is around engaging the small business directly to help them come back on board. Our drivers are small businesses, so we're effectively in that right now. But the consumer, what you're talking about is, what we've dealt in the past is, I already know I want to go somewhere, so should I take Lyft? Now there's a stimulating demand to go somewhere because I'm so used to sheltering in place. Right. And then there's a how are you going to get there, and choosing Lyft. So I think that is an interesting area to think about. But I would say more important than incentives is going back to safety and making sure that we can provide the safest possible experience. And I think that one interesting thing as we look in the future, I spend most of my time at Lyft on self-driving and what's our strategy there and what's our business that we're going to be launching. And that is an example of what that could be, is really exciting. If we had it today, you really do have contactless transportation, because there wouldn't be a driver and you would be able to step into a self-driving Lyft. The other piece of it is that since there's no driver and no controls, you can reimagine the cabin so that you can create it like we do other cabins, like in airlines, where there are suites next to each other in that one vehicle, so that you can minimize contact and keep safety high between multiple passengers, because shared rides are cheaper and you want to still share a ride, but you want to do it safely. That's there. So that's another example. And there's innovations around materials that the automotive industry can now use for the next generation cars around safer, cleaner surfaces. Or how do you even get a clean surface very quickly? Because right now, if you're using a certain type of surface, it takes a lot longer for a driver to wipe it down than other.
Raj, I know because you do focus so much of your time on, autonomous and self-driving. How does this crisis, and then how we come back on the other side, what are your thoughts on the broader marketplace? I think about a city like New York, right? And it emptying out, and you go outside for your walk or go to your grocery store or whatever, and sort of this nice empty city. And, as it slowly comes back, will this accelerate acceptance either at the municipal level, cities, or states, or the government who have to approve things, as well as customers being more comfortable or being more open to self-driving vehicles? How will this crisis impact the industry broadly moving forward?
I think it's going to impact it positively overall. I think in the short run, there's clearly there's an economic crisis, which makes funding of these environments more challenging, but those that have committed remain committed in self-driving. So I'm not as worried about that. When I look at the impacts from a municipality and a consumer perspective, all the reasons I mentioned around contactless transportation are important, but there are examples we even have today. There's a company called Nero that does small robot delivery. They're allowed to operate on roads. And they've been awarded contracts faster during this pandemic because they can, again, get essential deliveries without having to rely. It's not just about the safety of a driver, but we may be in a situation in the future where there just aren't enough drivers because of maybe a pandemic or some other situation. So how do you ensure things will continue to operate? You're going to rely more on automation for those critical things like transportation that are there. So I see this in general being adopted more. And also safety extends to traditional safety. And automotive accidents, 94% of them occur by human error. So if you can avoid those 94% of accidents, it's another added safety that the government can bring, because the government now has a license more than ever to make our lives safer.
And I know you got to jump. So my related and final question there is, 5G and, impacting IoT, smart cities, cars, autonomous. What are your thoughts on 5G and just moving forward with sort of telecommunications innovations? And, it sort of put a pause on everything, I suppose, but how will that transform, your business, as well as sort of just the consumer economy once we really get it deployed and consumers are using it?
So honestly, I don't think it impacts us that much. What I care about more is a reliable and consistent network than I do care about bandwidth.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced yet that a 5G network is going to be significantly more reliable. We have enough bandwidth to do what we need to do. Even in self-driving cars, one of the safety design features of a self-driving car is that the car in and of itself will be able to navigate the world.
Right.
If you take a signal from the outside, you risk cybersecurity, as an example. And in this case, what I'm saying is that you don't have a reliable network. The fact that our phone calls and our Zoom videos are going in and out all the time, and it's frustrating, is more of an issue, I think, than when we think about increasing bandwidth.
Right.
Maybe it matters more things for like VR, like I talked about even there, but that doesn't seem to be holding back my Oculus Quest either.
Right. Indeed. Well, hey, one more time, can you share the COVID registry site before we wrap?
Yeah, and I want to underline that whether you're COVID positive, COVID negative, or you've been untested, it takes 2 minutes to sign up, because you will be called upon for service, and you can choose to volunteer. And it's www.worldwithoutcovid.org.
That's great. Raj, it's really great to see you. I hope to see you in person at one of my shows in some time in the near future. And thanks again for taking the time.
And I hope this has been helpful, and I appreciate everyone's taking the time out for this, because I think innovation is needed now more than ever. So good luck.
I agree. Thanks again, Raj.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks, Drew, for a great conversation.